There's a lot of kids out there who need your help, and a donation could potentially save them. Link to my fundraiser is in the description.
He must have had a crazy reason to do that!
Huh? What do you mean?
You know, a locomotive?
Platinum Games has become a personal favorite video game development team of mine in recent years. After a degree of work for Capcom, including some as a different group, Clover Studio, this team has always been committed to letting their imaginations run wild and delivering complete thrill rides for games. I always look forward to whatever they have in store. Most of the time. Now, since this studio is just turning 15 years old, I wanted to show my appreciation to them by talking about an area that I think perfectly describes what they can do. And that immediately pointed me in the direction towards boss battles. I've always believed that bosses can potentially be some of the best personifications of a game, and even the highest points of them, and bosses from Platinum Games titles are largely responsible for that mindset. Heck, the fact that quite a few of them ended up on previous countdowns I made should be an indicator. So I thought it'd be fun to talk about some of my favorites in a video like this. The criterion of a boss being on here is cut from the same cloth as other boss battle videos I made, mostly from scenario, overall gameplay, to any other funny business that can apply, but the main rule I will be putting into effect is that while I'm not going to put a maximum of how many bosses from a single game can make it on here, I will have to talk about at least one boss from every Platinum Games title I have played, to give every title some form of credit. If you want a quick rundown of all the Platinum Games titles I'll be mentioning, here you go. So if you're expecting something for The Legend of Korra, Transformers Devastation, or Babylon's Fall for some reason, then sorry to disappoint you. Also, since most of the games I'll be talking about on here are M-rated, I'm just going to put this right here just in case you get a little squeamish to that type of thing. If most of what you're about to see doesn't bother you, or you were aware of this before you clicked on this video, then all I can say is, enjoy the show. So imagine you just started a game. You spend a few minutes getting a feel for everything and having fun while doing it. Then, after a couple minutes, you're fighting a giant mech with a sword. Yeah, Metal Gear Rising does not waste any time giving you exactly what you came for. The game does an overall solid job teaching you the basics of hacking and slashing in the first few minutes, including some VR missions if you wanted to, but the Metal Gear Ray takes things a step further by not only putting you into an insane scenario so early, not only by showing you how these techniques can be helpful, but also combining them with techniques like the ninja run, parrying, and blade mode. You can block its gunfire using the ninja run, the missiles can be easily cut before they go off, and you can even parry its foot when it tries to stomp on you. As you use blade mode to damage its armor, it'll get more erratic with these moves, and even fire a plasma cannon that you need to avoid, and use a giant blade of its own to try and slice you in half. Even after throwing it into the air and slicing off one of its own arms to the vocals of its boss theme, it still has some juice left. And if you thought the finisher I described just now was sweet, now try hopping across more of its missiles before slicing off its other arm, and then cutting the entire thing in half after running down a clock tower. That is just pure amazement. And it's only the first boss! The Metal Gear Ray perfectly sets up the amount of amazing absurdity that the game specializes in, while still being a well-designed first boss that allows you to get the hang of things without holding your hand. And with it just being in the first few minutes, you bet I was excited to see what the rest of the game had to offer. Oh, and one more thing. There we go. Sigmund felt a bit barren there for a second. Out of all the Platinum Games titles I've played, I'd probably say my least favorite has to be Vanquish. I still do very much enjoy the game with how creative and ridiculous it can be with scenarios, and with what your character can do, but I don't have as much incentive to come back to it as much as other titles, since the game's replay value is pretty lacking. The story is more of the dull kind of dumb than the funny kind of dumb, the game overall isn't as distinctive in terms of identity, and most of the bosses are really nothing special. They're not bad per se. I found myself enjoying the first encounter with the Argus robot, but most of them end up becoming regular enemies later on, or are Robert Burns. But if there's one boss I'm happy made the cut, it's the one that they saved for last. Now, I barely care about this story to describe the setup in full detail, but I think I can get away with summarizing it as, there's this one dude who's about to do a big no-no, autopilots these two robots to take you down, and you gotta fight them. Now, you've already fought him in one of these robots prior to this point in the game, but the way Bogey, Alpha, and Bravo take the idea and add a new flair to it is what makes the fight special. To start with, the arena not only gives you plenty of weapons and ammo to fight both these robots, so you shouldn't find yourself running out of ammo too much, but it's also huge and gives you plenty of cover should you need to regroup or something. But since this is the final boss, you have to take full advantage of it. The aforementioned cover changes mid-fight, meaning you basically have to stay on the move. These two will definitely not give you a break, but this isn't a fight where you're unfairly swarmed. Bogey, Alpha, and Bravo largely coordinate their attacks, and will definitely call you out if you're getting too reckless or too safe. Even after disposing of one robot via a quick time event, whichever one you don't take out will have the attacks that were previously shared. But at the same time, your abilities receive a massive buff. Your boost goes faster and farther, and you get more slowdown time to get some extra hits in. And at that point, it's an all or nothing fight. And that's just how I like it. Vanquish definitely has its ups and downs, but playing the game in general was an overall rewarding experience, and this fight was a great way to cap things off. It's a pretty straightforward fight at the end of the day, but that's all you really need sometimes. I wouldn't say the Wonderful 1-1 is high among my favorites, but I still love a lot of things about it. Every character is very likable, the art direction and the little touches thrown in are just oozing with charm, combat's really fun, diplomacy always fails, and the boss lineup is great. Every single one of them is large and in charge, and the amount that happens in their fights is just delightful. I'm surprised only 2 of them made the cut, but hey, I guess that's how it is sometimes. With that said, here's Prince Vorkin. Now, Vorkin basically acts as your rival for most of the game, constantly popping up to challenge you on many different occasions, with each passing encounter getting harder with new Unify forms, but it's the last one, the 6th operation, that I'm going with for this spot. With the previous encounters, it's assumed that he's among Gethdrik's forces, but by this point in the story, Immorta, his sister, revealed that his actions are a result of him obsessed with gaining power after the Gethdrik Federation destroyed his home. He originally wanted to become strong enough to overthrow them, but somewhere along that line, he lost sight of that goal and went mad. So with that knowledge, the stakes of this fight are recontextualized, which is definitely good because overall the fight does continue the dynamic the other one set up, with Vorkin using attacks similar to that of your own, but he likes to mix up his ways of fighting, with using Unified Naginata to keep you at bay, and Unified Tombstone and a Giant Scorpion for crowd control, but that's just one part of this fight. Now on board the Virgin Victory, Vorkin's gloves come off as he unleashes his own unlimited form. With this dynamic, his attacks are stronger and far more erratic than before. He can catch you off guard if you're not paying attention, or if you don't, you have good defensive options, which might be an issue if you're playing the original Wii U version, but with your unlimited form, you have as many ways to fight back, leading to satisfying payoffs. Not only is the way the story is told by this point really changed my view of Vorkin as a character, and adds something a little more to this encounter, but considering how the previous ones were fun to begin with, and how refreshing it is to battle something on your level compared to fighting something clearly bigger and stronger than you, is enough to make this a great example of a one-on-one duel of equals. And trust me, you'll see plenty of those on this list. I feel so bad for Star Fox Zero. Yes, I know a lot of it is heavily inspired by Star Fox 64, to the point of being derivative at points, and I know that learning and getting good with the controls is a little too big of an ask for many people, but in terms of just being a fun video game with tons of great moments, I think this game truly does knock it out of the park. I found it very enjoyable to use both views and try to get the most out of the action, and the levels themselves are just a blast to play through. This game has also got a really solid lineup of bosses. There's plenty of new imposing opponents to go up against, and the reimaginings of older foes feel all new in some form, like Platinum was adding their own charm to make each encounter more climactic, and nowhere is that more apparent than with the encounters with Star Wolf. Star Wolf is usually a highlight of a Star Fox game whenever they decide to show up, but the way Platinum took the base concept of them and absolutely ran with it makes them more fun to go up against, regardless of its select number of them or the whole squad. But the encounter with Wolf in the mission Lone Wolf decides to ditch any gimmicks and give the rawest depiction of their rivalry with Star Fox. See, in every encounter with them, either you outnumber them or they outnumber you. In this fight, however, no Andross army, no teammates, no giant space battles, it's just you and him. I really like this thematically because at this point you can access this fight, you've already fought Wolf quite a few times, so now that he's going to try and complete his mission personally is really cool. And as a nice detail to this scenario, this fight takes place on Vashina, which is where most players likely first encountered Star Wolf back in Star Fox 64, so with this likely being one of the last encounters with them in the game, it feels like things have come full circle, which I really appreciate. The fight in general does play similarly to all the other Star Wolf fights, but since there's nothing to get in your way, he has more health, which is fair, but his AI is also a bit smarter than previously, giving you few openings to get easy damage on him, meaning you have to ensure that every shot counts, especially when you get him down to half health and he decides to do his Lightning Tornado a lot. Not sure why he calls it that. This fight in terms of gameplay is nothing that groundbreaking, but being real, the way Platinum depicted an iconic rivalry in its purest form with little in the way, and the fact that it still does make use of what the game is best at, is why I like it so much. Wolf may not have been successful in his mission to stop Star Fox, but he sure as heck was successful in providing such fun fights. And now it's time for me to break the illusion and show my favorite way to dodge lightning tornado. Oh, come on, it's funny. I adore Nier Automata as a game, but looking back, I think it's on the weaker end of the spectrum for Platinum in terms of bosses. I mean, they're not bad, mostly, and a select few are imposing, but for the most part, they're just pretty straightforward and not as engaging. In fact, a lot of my favorite bosses in the game had something to spice up the gameplay, and or had some kind of story to tell, regardless if they connected to the main plot or not. And funny enough, my pick for the best boss in the game just so happened the one that gave me that mindset, early on. Now, the game was really starting to get itself into amazing territory with the amusement park level, showing that there may be more to the invading robots than meets the eye, but then we get to Beauvoir, who takes that to the logical extreme. In a nutshell, she was desperate for a robot's attention and wanted to change her appearance to become more beautiful, but this desire turned into obsession as she began to consume more and more robots and even androids, just so she can find love in this one robot, going borderline cannibalistic. Despite Beauvoir's lack of plot importance, I find it admirable just how much they were willing to give some kind of story to a boss the main character treated as just another foe to take down, and I found it sad to see just how far she fell, and absolutely disturbing. Now for the actual fight. I mean, this is a boss fight after all. Beauvoir is armed in several ways to launch projectiles and blades, and she goes crazy in goading the arena, leaving you with many different things to watch out for. This gets amped up when she uses the corpses of other androids to launch even more projectiles, and she even gets more erratic with her attacks, and even changes forms partway through. It's insane with just how much is going on in this one encounter, and how much they tried to make it feel emotionally impactful. And with this being so early on, this was definitely a strong way to get me to look forward to what was to come. I'm personally on the fence as to which Platinum Games style has my favorite collection of bosses, but I can easily say that Astral Chain is an easy contender. Every single one of these encounters is blood pumping and legitimately challenges you with what you're capable of. There really isn't a boss that I can say is bad. At worst, they're just fine, but they're the exception. The norm is absolutely amazing. So for my first pick, I'm going to have to reach a little deeper into the game, which yes, I will be spoiling a plot beat. It's been clear since the very beginning that both you and your sibling Akira have a close connection to legions that allow both players to wield them unlike any officer. And while this has proven to be helpful as the player is the only one to successfully regain their legion when it breaks free, it takes a while to fully realize just how much in sync they truly are when the player suddenly merges with their legion after a certain boss fight and goes off on a rampage completely mindless. And to make matters worse, the way the player and Akira are in tune with legions are exactly what the commander of Neuron, Joseph Calvert, needs for his project to help humanity evolve.
Yosef.
But this gets worse as after Akira is treated to quite the emotional shock, which is that Yosef cloned her, she suddenly merges with hers and goes off on an anger spree as well. The answer to this? You purposely fusing with your legion, leading to a feral beast battle. That's a pretty accurate depiction of how I felt when I got to this moment, helped out by the music Dark Hero suddenly playing in the background, and everything a Legion Fusion can do is suddenly put into your hands. Viciously fast attacks, giant explosions, and these claw projectiles. Also, Akira can apparently take shots at you from the background, that's neat. There isn't a ton to say about this fight in terms of how it plays out, because really, what you see is what you get. And it unfortunately got knocked down from the higher spots because it's really short, but man, does this moment stick with you. From the sheer chaos of it all, to the moment from a narrative standpoint, to both versions of Dark Hero being absolute jams, this is a moment I will not forget anytime soon. And hey, after this, the Legion Fusion becomes available to you to use everywhere else. Pretty rad. I'm just gonna leave this here because we're now dealing with...
Nobody said there'd be mad!
Mad World is definitely a game I can safely say is not like anything else I've played. It's borderline playful in the amount of blood and gore, the brutal ways people can die, and adult references that you definitely don't want your parents walking in while you're playing it. I really do have a ton of fun with this game despite how little shame it carries. Between the ways you can get creative with how you massacre your enemies, the overall art style of the game, Howard and Crease.
Well, at least that guy lived a good life. I don't know. He looks pretty young. I said good, not long. Besides, the older you get, the less happy you are. Amen.
There's loads to enjoy, including its boss roster. In fact, I'm kind of surprised that this is the only Mad World boss I'm talking about because most of them are very solid. So, who shall it be? A German general with wind turbines for arms, a warrior with a dual chainsaw staff, a bike duel with a doppelganger of you, a Star Wars reference? Actually, I'll take him. He seems cool. Now, this character, the Black Baron, shows up in every level to introduce you to minigames, known as bloodbath challenges, before being used by his assistant as a test dummy. But every single time, he survives and comes back to do it all over again. So, since he apparently has permanent auto life, no, seriously, how does one survive things like that? The game decides to make you duke it out with him in a boxing arena high above Varrigan City for the final battle. It may not seem like he's much compared to what you fought at first, but they go all in with this fight in terms of pure spectacle. The Baron has a variety of punches and kicks that keep you on your toes, and his power struggle is literally straight out of a Rocky movie, and I'm totally here for it. But when his health goes down, does he get mad? He's not only faster with all his strikes, but he can knock you out of the arena and let his assistant bludgeon you, his foot dives and make Dr. Doom blush, and he also has this black hole attack that's an instant kill. Despite this, it's by no means unfair. Most of his attacks hurt really badly, but you are given enough room to prepare for each attack, even with the game's rather clunky dodging system, and the geishas you saved earlier may occasionally give you happy onions which restore all your health. It's a fun fight that makes great use of everything the game does best, both in terms of concept and gameplay, and the sheer spectacle to the ways you finish him off are just a great note for the game to go out on. And to think we got all this from a guy who doesn't want to destroy the world or have some kind of evil scheme in mind, but instead just be the last thing in your way between you and the right to call yourself rank 1 of Deathwatch. I tell you, that's the ticket to a great battle sometimes. I've gone on and on as to how much I enjoy bosses that are duels of equals in the past. I know there's always merit to finding something that's bigger and stronger than you, but I personally enjoy it when a game pits me against an opponent who's on a similar level to my own, as narratively, it can be used to show more of what each character is like, and gameplay-wise, it can teach you more about the ins and outs of what you can truly do, and show how much you can grow or have grown depending on the circumstance. And leave it to Metal Gear Rising to showcase this in full force with Jetstream Sam. Now, Sam has had a strong presence throughout the game, acting as a vehicle for Ryan's character arc of seeing his blade as more than just a tool of justice, and that protecting what he cares about means a lot more. Heck, at the beginning of the game, he completely destroys Raiden in a fight, causing him to lose one of his eyes and his left arm. But it all ties into both of them having similar ideals of justice and a reason to fight, which does show that the two might have more in common than you think. It all comes to fruition in a fight out in the middle of nowhere on the Sunset Horizon. And man, what a fight we've got! Sam is very quick on the draw with his strikes, so he can easily combo you if your parrying game is off. He can easily perform strikes from a long range, and will call you out if you are swinging carelessly. With his behavior, using anything other than your normal sword is a really bad idea, as he can just jump out of the way and capitalize on the openings you're going to leave. He's still a threat even when you knock his sword away, with various martial arts moves that will knock you around the field, meaning you'll need to change up your game for this part of the fight. No matter what he's using, Sam is a very difficult opponent to overcome, but that's really what I expect. This is a big test between you and the blade at this point in the story, so the game really expects you to know what you're doing. But one of my favorite parts is actually how it ends. You don't chop Sam into hamburger like you do with most of the other bosses in the game. Sam's actually granted an honorable death, as he truly did fight for what he believed, and was ready for Ryan to do the same. The conclusion honoring him was probably the best way to end their rivalry, and the fight in general was a challenging and fun duel that remains a highlight of the game, and in my opinion, a highlight of one-on-one duels in general. Those who are at least somewhat familiar with Platinum games, or at least have been watching some bigger YouTubers for some time, probably wanted this one to show up. Finally getting around to talking about the Bayonetta games, they have some of the strongest boss lineups in Platinum's repertoire, so it's funny how I'm only bringing them up now, and starting with a very popular entry. Guess that's how things work sometimes. But I guess I can't blame myself too much, as the game is already going bonkers even before the fight begins, with a motorcycle section up a missile that takes you into space. That sounds like a scientist's worst nightmare. But it doesn't use up all the thrill factor too early, as the fight you get after that, and a Bayonetta rescue, is easily a culmination of Bayonetta 1's highest highs. Juliet has several projectiles swarming you from the very start, some of which you can actually use against her, and can even punch you from where she floats, I guess. But as you deal damage, she alters the arena from a pit of magma to a pit of ice to a series of floating islands on a thunderstorm, all of which require a quick form of navigation by various platforms, avoiding an onslaught of raining projectiles to attack her hair braids that have faces, and eventually reaching the head and wailing away at it. Even when she chooses to go back to how the fight started near the end, there's still new ways you're tested, which includes throwing entire galaxies, which will leave you as a sitting duck if one manages to hit you. This fight is not only a great test of what you can do, but it goes all in with the absurdity the game relished in from frame 1. I do really enjoy how the fight does serve as a solid final test of your skills, but to be frank, the spectacle is largely why I love this fight as much as I do. I mean, where else can you punch a goddess's soul out of her own body before taking control of it to lead it on its way to burn into the sun, or crumble the stone remnants of said boss upon re-entry to the atmosphere? Not very many other places. That's where. Even though I don't think the story in Bayonetta 2 is that much better than the first, as it does have quite a few similarities, I found the central point of the game, Bayonetta trying to retrieve John's soul in a time of chaos, to be a solid motivator. I did buy the developed relationship in the first game, so it was surprising to see John's soul literally get dragged to Inferno, and it was admirable to see just how far Bayonetta was willing to go just to save her best friend. And the boss fight they built up for that moment? Hoo boy! Now, there really isn't much to go over in terms of Auron as a character, aside from her hatred towards Madama Butterfly, a demon Bayonetta made a pact with, but it really doesn't matter, because this being the climax of Bayonetta saving Jean, and that little hit near the beginning of the game, is enough for them to go absolutely insane with this fight. Auron is about as nimble as you, meaning she can combo you easily, but combine that with her whip attacks and these demon flowers she can potentially summon, there's quite a bit to watch out for. Honestly, it reminds me a lot of Jean's battles from the first game in more ways than one. But there might be a reason for that. As Auron is using Jean's soul for power, she turns into this giant scorpion hybrid after you finish the first phase of the fight, and things go from a really cool duel of equals to, oh my god, I'm gonna die! Despite Auron's size in this phase, she's still very fast and her attacks are far more devastating than before. It's not an easy fight, but considering what's on the line, I welcome it. Auron really does challenge you in ways the game has already been doing up to that point, and there's several quicktime events where you literally rip away at the casing keeping Jean's soul, which is both gruesome and very satisfying. Heck, even the environment is literally crumbling apart, and the music sounds like it's orchestrating your demise. That's when you know stuff's going down, and you can't mess up here. But that mood, along with how the fight plays out, are why I love it so much, and it made saving a friend all the more rewarding. But then afterwards, Rodon seals her inside some thingamajiggy, turning it into a spiked whip, and gives it to you as a new weapon. Rodon makes a very good Santa, if you couldn't tell. So yeah, Yosef was a bad guy all along. At this point, he might as well put his mind into a being clearly more powerful than him. Wait, he technically already does that in the game. How things can work out sometimes. As it turns out, this whole time, Yosef was studying Legionic Fusion for a project that he would eventually use to help humanity evolve. It's pretty easy to tell if there's bad news inbound whenever that happens, and both your player and Akira were the ticket to making it work. Even though he would need a large amount of Legionises to complete the project, of which there aren't that many, he came up with a compromise with the clones of Akira, which allowed him to succeed in bringing his project to fruition, Noah. Wait a second. Noah. Yosef the Ark.
I get it!
But anyways, the final battle with Noah and Astral Chain, pretty spectacular. Maybe not as much in the first phase as it really is a platforming challenge, but the second phase where it takes you to its core is pretty nice. It's got a few attacks to watch out for, like ruptures in the ground, plasma enemies, and whatever the heck this is, but it's still a pretty straightforward fight, all things considered. But after it concludes, as the Akiras kill Yosef and hold Noah back, I start to get the feeling like there's... Okay, you know what? I'm gonna drop the facade. The main reason why this fight's awesome is the part where you're up against Noah Prime. Now, the game was legitimately challenging in a lot of areas, even on the easiest difficulty, but let me tell you, Noah Prime is on an entirely different plane of existence. His melee combos can easily do a ton to you, he's got a large assortment of projectiles to use against you, some of which he can use from far away, and he's incredibly fast. Heck, if you get him down to a third of his health, he's got spirit bombs and insta-kill black holes for good measure. This boss might sound like a pain at first, but truth be told, I find it quite the opposite. I mean, sure, the hitboxes for the lasers can be kinda janky, and the cloning attack can be annoying to deal with if you get really unlucky, but moments like these are the exception, not the norm. Every single one of his attacks has some degree of wind-up to it, and some are pretty easily telegraphed in advance, so it's absolutely possible to prepare for everything that he's got. It's very difficult to do this, mind you, it is the final boss after all, but it's both doable and incredibly satisfying to pull off, especially if you manage to catch him at just the right time. Compared to other final bosses, the spectacle and gameplay don't correlate as much, but I still do love this fight for being challenging, while successfully feeling like it's able to incorporate many different strategies that you can do, meaning you can easily find your own way of dealing with this onslaught. Combine that with an amazing finisher where you use all your legions, and this fight was a great way for a game as amazing as Astral Chain to draw to a close on. Well, it's time for me to start messing with things a bit. Even though I personally prefer Bayonetta 2 over the first as a game, Both have a fantastic lineup of bosses. Every single one of them tries to find some way of just going nuts with the game's overall style, while still nailing the gameplay and feeling grand and epic in scale. So, to wrap up representation for this duology, this spot is actually a tie between my favorite bosses from both games. I usually try to avoid things like this for obvious reasons, but the first reason as to why these two candidates, or rather, these 4 battles, are sharing this spot, is because they're all against Bayo's daddy. For as much as I won't hold the stories of either game on a pedestal, one thing I think they did well with was the character arc of Bayonetta's father, the Lumen Sage Baldur. I mean, more so in the second game, but since it does recontextualize what he was in the first game, where he basically wants to resurrect Jubileus to do villain stuff, it actually makes him a rather compelling character in the long run. But no matter what the context, all of his fights are some of the best parts of the games. Starting with the one in the first game, Baldur's on the verge of fully restoring Bayonetta's memories using her past self, and to tempt her into doing just that, playing into his hand, you fight him on debris from a building as you're falling down a ridiculous distance. Man, construction for this tower must have been a nightmare. As you engage Baldur, he'll use several different light and fire-based attacks that you'll definitely need to watch out for. Considering you're staying on debris from the building that can vary in size, this test can vary in terms of difficulty, but it'll never get so small that you're a sitting duck. He can even order a laser from a satellite to rain down and throw buildings at you for good measure, adding both absurdity in terms of spectacle and variety in what attacks he'll do. But just when you think it's over and you get to have Gamora gnaw on him, he pretty much ruins your climax by getting out and snapping Gamora's neck. Side note, I really like the sound design when he does that. Makes him look even cooler. And he does that again later by causing the centipede to explode before brushing his hair with a feather. Very classy. But when you deplete his health a third time, all it takes is you shooting him in the forehead to end the fight. Really does make for a fitting way to finish him off. Technically, because in Bayonetta 2, a younger Baldur comes back and acts as that game's equivalent to what John was in the first game. Going under the guise of the Masked Luin for most of the game, you fight him 3 times in total, with the first 2 playing out in a similar manner. He'll largely use a variety of different melee attacks with his dual blade staff, cast quite a few fire spells, call upon various bosses from Bayonetta 1 for his equivalent of Wicked Weaves, and activate his own equivalent of Witch Time, all of which act as great skills to see what you know about what you can do, and what to do when they're used against you. The major difference between the first 2 fights are the settings, a city courtyard in the first one, and the belly of an insidious monster in the second, complete with an ocean of blood, and the various summons both characters do mid-fight, which adds an extra attack he can do. The first one also has a moment in the air amidst the destruction, and a section where you play as Madama Butterfly punching Temperantia, which is really neat. The third one is where they officially show that he's a younger Baldur. Kind of, it's pretty obvious at other points in the game, but it's everything else that makes up for it. Baldur in this fight not only attacks more aggressively, but also mixes in attacks from previous encounters with attacks that he had in the first game, which brings things full circle. Heck, the environment in which you fight him is within Inferno, as it's literally crumbling apart, which adds a nice bit of scenery to go along with such a fun fight. No Baldur wrecking your summons though, so that's disappointing. The reason why I decided to go with every single encounter with Baldur across Bayonetta 1 and 2 is that a lot of what I like about one fight can be applied to the rest, and most of the differences are mostly just flavor text. It doesn't feel right to have separate segments dedicated to each respective fight, so I feel like this is a good compromise. Either way, these fights are breathtaking. I cannot wait to see what Bayonetta 3 has to rival this. Man, I am so excited for that game. I think that you've been catching on at this point that in most of Platinum's titles, the final boss is one of the best, if not the best boss in the game. Not every final boss fits this criterion, but the ones that do soar with a rainbow spectrum. And on that note, let's talk about the fight with Jerkinga from the Wonderful 101 again. The finale of the game was already incredible and insane as it was, but when you infiltrate Gethsterk's Death Star only to find out it's the final boss in its entirety, it sets a very solid tone of what's to follow. The first phase does get the job done with trying to hack away at the machine while avoiding the tentacles that spawn in, some of which reference previous bosses, but it's where he turns into a token floating head with 2 hands where things get fun. All of his attacks are modeled after Unite morphs and can be very destructive, and he can seal away your teammates to prevent you from using certain attacks, but the most fun part about this phase is that you can stun him by interrupting certain attacks instead of doing it the old-fashioned way, making solid use of individual aspects about your Unite morphs. And then he turns into a robotic supergiant and takes the fight out into space, leaving you to build a giant robot army and destroy all his weak points. These parts of the fight can get tricky, as his projectiles can get crazy to avoid, and you'll need to build your Unite morphs just right in order to break each barrier in the third phase, but combined with the incredible boss theme, these parts of the fight feel so great to do, and it all culminates in a beam collision between the CHIQ Marble Buster and the final ultimate legendary Earth Power Supermax Justice Future Miracle Dream Beautiful Galaxy Big Bang Little Bang Sunrise Starlight Infinite Fabulous Totally Final Wonderful Arrow. Could not resist saying that a second time, and I'm not sorry. That totally wipes out this monstrosity. Yeah, there is a ton going on in this boss alone, even more so than several other bosses on here, but it never gets to a dull state, and it all shows just how much fun the devs truly had making this game as a whole. I can totally see why many would consider this among their favorite games from Platinum, because despite its shortcomings, it is by far some of the most memorable gameplay moments of them all. Nowhere is this more apparent than with this final battle. Truly wonderful indeed.
Making the mother of all omelets here, Jack. Can't spread over every egg.
The memes about Armstrong shall be eternal. I think many of you are expecting this guy to show up, even if you haven't watched my stuff, but my thoughts on this fight still hold up as strongly as they ever did since I first got to this part, and I will shamefully admit that there really isn't anything new that I can add that I, and many others, haven't already. So if I were desperate, I'd tell you to go watch the last time I spoke about him, but I'll be nice and give a quick rundown, even though you should totally go see that video anyways. With Armstrong sending all of Desperado's projects into motion, and managing to manipulate a lot of the public's thoughts behind the scenes in some form, he's been a massive presence for most of the game, despite the first time we actually meet him in person being near the end of the game. So, why all this? Money? Fame? Well, not really. He wants to goad the nations of the world in order to start an all-out war, so that America will be eventually reduced to nothing, and he could build a new America on top of that. One where everyone is free to fight their own battles, away from a government. It may not be the deepest the Metal Gear series has gone with political commentary, but it's still thought-provoking regardless. Not to mention a little scary with how well it can be applied for how things are for us nowadays. Heck, Ryan takes up a little bit of this for his own morals, though not to a point of condoning him, let alone siding with him. Combined with some absolutely priceless lines that we are still quoting and using for memes to this day, and these moments are nothing short of a great watch. And he managed to supply a great boss fight on top of that. Armstrong's not only fast, but he can deal a truckload of damage if your parry game is off. Pretty much everything he does makes use of everything you've learned in this game. Parrying, using quick time events to gain an edge, and using blade mode when the time calls for it. It feels so satisfying to knock him around like a pinball and deal massive damage to him, as it does to adapt to his increased aggression later on and stun him when he attempts to heal himself. As it does to actually finish the fight through gruesomely stabbing him before using the sword to rip his heart out. The fight is everything that's great about Metal Gear Rising. It's crazy conceptually, it plays well, it's very challenging, and they even supplied more with the cutscenes on top of it. It was the perfect note for the game to go out on, and I will always adore it. But who the heck could possibly top him? Well, we'll find out. Right after the honorable mentions, and I chose to give every game I've played an honorable mention to give them some more credit. Von Turlen Killer from Mad World, love the design, and the way you saw off one of his arms during the fight and can use it against him really does add more. Sapien Shift from Bayonetta, I think the way it's fought in the water is a nice change of pace, and that climax is fantastic. Argus from Vanquish, cool fight that makes use of your mobility and choice of weak points. Sadly gets reused a bunch, but I'll take what I can get. Camzin from Metal Gear Rising, for a boss exclusive to Blade Wolf, this feels very satisfying, especially when you sneak up on him and when you finish him off. Giga Gujin from the Wonderful 101, great to see Robot Punch-Out return, but the stakes, atmosphere, and music make it so much more. Gamora from Bayonetta 2, what a way to start a game off on. Mother Strider from Star Fox Zero, really good use of the Landmaster, and the sheer size of this thing makes fighting it all the more climactic in my opinion. Koshi and Roshi from Nier Automata, all the cool additions to the gameplay of the fight, especially switching between A2 and 9S at certain intervals, enhances the fight quite a bit. And finally, Homunculus Beta from Astral Chain, a pretty challenging fight for the midpoint of the game, and I love the overall scale and how many different methods they give you to damage it. Using the chain counter to throw it feels so good. Well, that's that. Let's move on to number 1. After some consideration, I would have to say that my favorite game from Platinum Games overall is Astral Chain. I'm not exactly sure how beloved it is among those who play their titles, but to me, this game is everything I love not just about Platinum Games, but video games as a whole. The combat is not only super stylized, but incredibly versatile with the weapons and legions you have at your disposal. There's loads of things to do in every chapter aside from the main objectives, from investigations to fetching cute kitties, I will always love that. The arc is filled with a plethora of memorable environments from the neon metropolis to the dirty slums, and the story is overall enjoyable, but I do think it could have handled its villains a little better. Yosef's already been brought up, so we won't talk about him, but then there's Jenna Anderson. She does have her moments, and I do like how they try to portray her as someone who wishes to save the world in a way she sees fit, since she's not wrong about Yosef being a big meanie, but the lengths she has resorted to also make her the villain for a good chunk of the game. But she isn't given as much screen time as she needs to get the most out of what the devs had in mind. but since we're mostly focused on trying to stop her from potentially causing untold amounts of destruction, it was only a matter of time before you squared off against her. With that in mind, the time comes when she ambushes Yosef atop the helipad of the Neuron headquarters. So with her turning into an aberration via Blue Evolve, kinda like what she did earlier in the game, and with Legion at hand, the two of you finally clash. And it is glorious! I was legit not expecting to enjoy the battle with Jenna as much as I did, but I was blown away by how it took aspects Platinum Games had proven to specialize in and make something completely new out of it. As an aberration with a spear for her hand, Jenna is far more formidable than you might think. She's very fast and has several different ways to combo you in an instant, one of which I'm convinced she learned from Jetstream Sam. But she also has attacks that can either freeze or paralyze you on the spot, and while sure you can break out of them, against an opponent this nimble, you're going to want to stay on your toes at all times. Already this boss sounds like on par with many duels of equals I mentioned, with the challenge coupled with the great climactic feel, but that only scratches the surface in terms of what this battle has to offer. After more Blue Evolve and a motorcycle section fighting off more aberrations, Jenna's second form is not only still incredibly nimble and carries over a couple attacks, but with her now having wings, your aerial game is put to the test, or your long range game, depends on what you want to do. But combine this with several melee attacks which can deal heavy damage, lasers that she spins around and covers a lot of range, and lightning raining down which can paralyze you, this fight can get even more challenging and even more chaotic. Jenna does not let up with the onslaught and is fighting with everything online, but you can easily do the same to keep her at bay because you are capable with every one of your legions, so you better know how to use them well. Even after all that though, she takes a page out of Jubileus' book, and the final phase of the fight takes place in a massive gravity field with debris flying around. The environment of this phase is not only changing, adding a bit of platforming into the mix, and there's occasional aberrations in your way, but Jenna herself has a smorgasbord of attacks that she can do even at long range. Some of them are very destructive, but it feels so cathartic finding ways to work around them, from dodging, to using your X Legion as a shield, to stunning her at just the right moments, and landing that final blow is just satisfaction at its finest. And the aforementioned Legion fusion moment occurring after this fight is concluded was absolutely earned, and it gave the aftermath an honestly very bittersweet resolution. There is so little I can find wrong with this battle overall. Platinum went above and beyond with the spectacle from the scenery to the music in each of the phases, but they also designed a genuinely challenging fight around it that makes use out of everything you can do. But above all else, I think this fight is a solid representation of how strong you as the player can become with something supernatural. Since Astral Chain doesn't give you as many free-flowing abilities compared to something like Bayonetta or Nier Automata, getting to that point of power legit takes more effort both in terms of gameplay and story. And with Jenna getting this desperate, using whatever she can to make sure Yosef doesn't see his plans through, disregarding general safety, there's a sense of accomplishment with syncing well with your legions, and teaming up with them to triumph over something that wants to use a similar power for dangerous reasons. It just feels right, and summarizes everything I love about this game. It is all astronomically spectacular, and it has rightfully earned its place as my number one. I am the Lightning Ripper, and thank you for everything you've contributed to the gaming community, Platinum Games. No matter what, you always find a way to satisfy, and you've earned all my respect. I will absolutely be looking forward to whatever you have planned in the future. See you all next time!